Hello, and welcome to Step Up Nigeria's podcast. Our podcast is an initiative built to create awareness of governance issues that highlight the cost of corruption and its impact on service delivery. Our podcast is also aimed at promoting values that will help to build a society of people with integrity and provide solutions to service delivery challenges faced by everyday Nigerians. Happy African Anti-Corruption Day 2022. And as people from Africa and who live in Africa and are making efforts to improve service delivery and governance in our countries, are young people the key to achieving zero corruption in Africa? And on this episode, we have special guests from all over Africa, the African Youth Anti-Corruption Ambassadors. So I'd like to start by asking them to introduce themselves. I am Ferami Inyoda, and I am the Youth Anti-Corruption Ambassador for West Africa and the host of this podcast. So I'd like to call on the Youth Ambassador from East Africa to introduce herself.
My name is Stella Agara. I'm the Youth Anti-Corruption Ambassador for East Africa, even though I no longer qualified to be called a Youth Ambassador. I am also a governance specialist working on anti-corruption, economic issues, tax justice, as well as newly climate justice issues. And I hail from Kenya.
Stella, we're glad to have you. Can we have the South Africa Youth Ambassador?
Hi everyone, I'm Shamila Hosi from Botswana. I'm the Youth Ambassador for Southern Africa. And I'm also a development practitioner, though not actively full-time on that right now. I'm also just really much consulting on environmental, social, and governance issues out here in Botswana, and quite newly in addition to mine that we are about to open here in Botswana. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. And finally, we would like to introduce the Youth Ambassador for North Africa.
Hi everyone, I'm Rasha Khamesi. I'm a North Africa Anti-Corruption Youth Ambassador, and I'm from Tunisia. I work for the National Good Governance and Anti-Corruption in Tunisia, and yes, I'm happy to be here with you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rasha. Thank you, Shamil. And thank you, Stella. Welcome to our podcast. All over Africa today, we celebrate African Anti-Corruption Day. Do you think zero corruption is achievable in Africa? And this could just be a yes or no answer if you have something. I'll start with Stella.
My thoughts are that zero corruption can be achieved anywhere in the world if the citizens of the jurisdiction are intentional about achieving zero corruption. I say the citizens because systems rarely engage in corruption. It is the people involved in managing systems who create mechanisms to either benefit out of a system or engage in corruption within a system. So it is the individuals who must resolve to put an end to corruption and achieve zero tolerance to corruption. What the definition of what zero corruption would look like is what then would determine what zero corruption is. And when I say the definition, I mean that is it going to involve acknowledging some of the bribes offered as legitimate payments, so that they're receipted and documented as cash that needs to be taxed by the state? Or does it mean we go the Puritan way and ensure that every single bribe is branded as corrupt, and ensuring that rigging of elections, all those other practices, nepotism and the likes of corruption, are actually branded as corruption? So basically, what we define it as is what will determine then our access to the point of zero tolerance to corruption. But it is definitely achievable.
So thank you very much, Stella, for that introduction to the conversation. I'd like to hear from Racha next on your thoughts on if zero corruption is achievable in Africa. If you think yes, what steps or strategies do you think we need to put in place there? Or if no, what challenges make this unachievable?
Okay, so my thoughts. I mean, this is like my thoughts, my opinion, and I don't want to sound pessimist or anything, but Talking about zero corruption, I don't think that's possible, not only in Africa, I don't think it's possible in any other continent or even in any country. I think we might be talking about, I don't know, maybe corruption that is less than 3 or 5%, but I don't think that we're talking about zero. Because if we're going to be realistic, I mean, it's not that easy to get rid of corruption, and it's not that easy because there's always going to be, but I'm agreeing with Stella, it depends also on the definition of corruption. I mean, it depends. I'm going to say that I'm going to talk about the corruption that we most know, since we all know there's no specific definition for it, but there is always going to be somebody who is bribing an employee or an administrator to like have an easy way, someone who's slacking at work. It's stuff like that, even small cases like that. And honestly, I don't think it's not only about that, but I think we're here talking about mentalities as well, because we're not only talking about corruption as a specific case, as in something that's small. I think we're talking about corrupt cultures, if you can call it that. Speaking from, for example, from Tunisia, from my country, unfortunately, and I'm sure a lot of you and a lot of other countries are the same, some of us were raised and born in corruption. They don't even see it as something that is wrong. They don't see that it's something that's harming society. On the contrary, they see it like something that's normal, like somehow a smart way of beating I don't know, a system that they don't like or don't approve of. And that doesn't mean that they are right. But as I said, zero corruption, it's hard, but it's not impossible, but it's very hard. But yeah, I think we might be talking about, I don't know, a small percentage of corruption, maybe, hopefully. Thank you.
But let's hear from Shamil before I make my comments.
I mean, really, I think from my perspective, achieving zero corruption is it's all dependent on what measures we're willing to employ as as a globe to ensuring that people like that to ensure that we don't normalize, as it is the case right now, that we don't normalize corruption activities, that we don't incentivize people who promote corruption. In the immediate or in the interim, do I think that it's possible for us to achieve zero corruption? No, I do not think so, and I'll tell you why. This is because as a people, we have not yet committed to building a culture of good ethics. We have not yet embraced that as part of our culture, as something that we want to basically continue doing. And then on the other hand, we have people who certainly want to get things done through shortcuts. And remember that with corruption, it's a two-way street, right? Where there's somebody else willing to make an offer, there's another person who is actually willing to receive that offer. And all that is a question of ethics and principles. Are we as a people saying that we're willing to embrace ethical conduct, that we're willing to embrace principles, good principles, to ensure that at a point where you are offered corruption or where you are offered an incentive to do something that that it's not supposed to be done, are you in a position to basically stand your ground? And are you willing to also, when you see that happening, are you willing to correct that? And then I think it goes back to an issue of Stella, the issue that Stella raised as well, to say that, in dealing with corruption, really, the system is not the problem. The problem is people who are willing and who are so hell-bound to making sure that they beat the system to benefit off of the system. And I think also really that, in campuses, behavioral conduct as a people, it encompasses principles, as I said. I've just recently been introduced to Ray Dalio. He's an author, and he writes on principles. He's written a book called Principles. I really highly recommend that for any management, for any individuals, either at grassroots or any level of management, to read that book and really to pick up some of the principles and embrace those and start running with them. I think only when we are willing to actually, attain and build really a culture of, principles and a culture of integrity and ethics, that's when we can only be able to actually fight corruption. Do I think it's possible in our generation? Possibly no, because a culture of principles and ethics is something that has to be systematic as well. We have to teach that to our children right now while they are in primary school, so that they grow up with this ethics and they learn to embrace this ethics, and they build a culture around the particular ethics that we're willing to teach them. And then also, on the other hand, I think there's a there's a big mismatch or a gap really between information or knowledge really around corruption. Many people don't even know what corruption is. I mean, giving a bribe to someone in order for you to fast track the line and to get whatever it is that you want, to most people is an issue of convenience, right? So that in them, they don't see it as them doing something wrong. They're seeing it as just fast tracking their opportunity to make sure that they save time on that, and that it's somewhat convenient for them. And then again, you have people who basically act on corrupting or engage in corruption activities, and they know that what they're doing is really wrong. And most of this really cognizant behavior, we see it in people who are mainly involved with like grand corruption, where you're a government officer, you're not supposed to be taking a huge chunk of project money into your own pocket, or basically asking service providers to give you a huge chunk of that implementing money to make sure that you're safe, in order for you to give them licensing or anything like that. Those people, however, they know what they're doing. But corruption, as it pertains to grassroots, as it pertains to the masses, I think many people really don't even understand what that is, because it's, for them, it's just a matter of making sure that they are not inconvenienced in any way possible. And I think it will be also important that we perhaps in our education, in our strives to making sure that we raise awareness around corruption, that we somewhat make it relatable to people, how impacts of corruption in our day-to-day lives, how it inconveniences us, and why we should not tolerate it. And until we reach such levels where people really understand corruption in its many and different definitions, how do we implore anti-corruption and zero corruption principles in people to be able to call out for that. And there are security issues as well that are really concerned when it comes to corruption, to say, as you are willing to be the good guy, the guy who basically, shuns corruption and all, in all its ways, how safe are you among a society that sees it feed and that sees it normal for somebody to pay bribery for a license, or to pay bribery for school results or anything like that? People these days are willing to kill in order for them to to get their way. So I think that would be my 2 cents really in this round. Yeah.
Thank you, Shamil. More like 20 cents, but that's fine. I think you made some very very excellent comments. And I agree with all that you've all said, because it really is a yes and no question. Because yes, it's possible, but there are certain things that need to be in place for that to happen. And
Yep.
for that to happen, there needs to be like an overhaul of society, which leads to like the way I refine the question: do we think that youth or young people are the key to achieving this zero corruption? So as it stands, I mean, we've mentioned both on the grand corruption level and on the petty corruption level, there's a generation of Africans that do not see bribery and embezzlement and fraud as something that's wrong. And in my country particularly, which all of you are very aware of, there's also a rise in cybercrime amongst young people. So do we think that youth are the key to achieving this? And I want to know, if yes, what steps or strategies do you think the youth need to put in place to ensure that their countries have reduced corruption by the time that they're older? Or if no, what makes that unattainable amongst young people as well? So, and I know you've touched on this, especially on like the values-based education angle, which is something that I would love for all of us to speak a bit more on throughout the call. So let me start with Racha on this round. Do you think youth are the key to achieving this?
I said yes, definitely. I think actually youth are the answer to this question, like without even thinking that it's not possible for them or that they can't achieve it. No, they are the ones that can achieve it. And that is, I don't know if can I elaborate more. This is not the yes or no. Yeah, okay. As Stella said, it's about principles. How can we do that? Definitely install and implement good governance and anti-corruption subjects in primary school and in the education system as a whole. Actually, I've worked on a project like this, and I'm like proud to say that not only I worked on 2 levels. I worked on the primary school, and it was such a great experience for me and for the students. We went to their schools, elaborated the risks of corruption, talked about them, mostly about governance, because as young kids, we didn't really want to talk about the negative thing, corruption, but we talked about the good thing, which is governance. And we taught them that it's necessary and that we can achieve not free, but we can beat corruption through using governance. And honestly, it was a good experience. And mainly, it wasn't only like to affect kids there or students, primary school and high school students. It was also a way for us to make the system or the government think about adding governance subject to the educational system. And at one time, it was successful because, as I said, not only did we work with primary school, we also worked with university students, and it was a success that they added a good governance and anti-corruption masters in the law university now. Yeah, we have a master that's for good governance and anti-corruption, which is, as I said, youth are the answer. They manage, I think, that, yes, that's it. Youth are the answer to beat corruption.
Yeah. Thank you, Asha. So let's go to Stella.
My main response concerning what would be the panacea for corruption is normally making corruption expensive, make it extremely costly for people to engage in corruption. But if I was asked the question of which part of society would actually play the biggest role in promoting zero tolerance to corruption, then I guess it helps to acknowledge the fact that we need to start with people who haven't had extreme exposure to corruption. So this is one of those areas, or this is one of those aspects of life where youth and should I call it innocence, for lack of a better word to describe people who haven't been fully corrupted, affirms their capability and capacity to be the stewards for zero tolerance in our society, by virtue of the fact that they haven't interacted with corruption fully and benefited heavily from it. They may still have some room to be, modeled into the kind of people who wouldn't tolerate corruption in our societies. But this is going to be heavily determined by the stance that they will take. Are we dealing with young people who have already given up on the fight against corruption? Young people who believe it is impossible to end corruption? Are we dealing with young people who have understood matters of integrity and have chosen deliberately to act against corruption? Or are we dealing with young people who have already started benefiting slightly from corruption and think it needs to be legitimized? And in addressing this matter with them, I think we also need to have certain conversations. conversations about good governance, conversations about working systems, because the situations that you hear being described by Shamil and Russia, even by you, Farah, and me, are situations where there's poor governance, and therefore young people or citizens have found ways to get around the poor governance and get what they need. But if we are to imagine with the youth a society where the governance systems work, in countries where when you apply for a passport, you just need to wait for a certain stipulated amount of time to get your passport, nobody bothers to bribe. In countries where jobs are accessible to anybody who's qualified, people just go to school, achieve their qualifications, and apply for jobs. And they get access to them without needing to canvass, needing to call anybody, needing to maneuver to be able to access those jobs. So recognizing corruption as a failure of governance and as an absolute failure of governance would then allow our societies to nurture young people who are interested in promoting zero tolerance to corruption. The reason why corruption continues in perpetuity, and Russia was saying she was born into corruption, we were all born into corruption. The reason why it continues in perpetuity is because the problems of governance continue also in perpetuity. I think I've seen just one clean election ever since I started voting in Kenya. And probably that's because we were all getting rid of our first-time dictator like every other country in Africa. And from that time, I have never, ever seen a clean election. If my country committed to a clean election, we would have the kind of quiet elections that we see happening, across the borders in Europe, where an election happens, an announcement is made, and no drama, But because we have committed ourselves to refuse we normally say we have refused to count, but to refuse to have integrity in the handling of the vote, then everybody keeps preparing with new ways of engaging in corruption. Many of them actually work with young people because young people have knowledge on ICTs to manipulate the system and ensure that then the vote works for them. If this was not happening, young people would be using their ICT knowledge for something more useful, like they are already doing in certain aspects of our society. So for me, it's about asking ourselves how we will engage young people in a critical conversation about how to improve governance in the globe. And in improving governance, we're then going to eliminate corruption. And where some of these convenience fees need to be included so that other people may benefit, then structure it in a manner that does not create, inequality. The US and the UK embassy, for me, you would know because it's happening in Nigeria as well, has a mechanism for applying for visa. And everybody gets to apply for visa and wait a certain amount of time. However, if you want preferential services, you then get to pay an extra fee, which will accord you preferred treatment in terms of positioning for interviews, will afford you preferred treatment in terms of how you're received when you arrive at the embassy. You don't get to queue with the rest of the hustlers. And when you arrive, probably it will afford you a cup of tea and everything, and it will afford you a speedy response. That amount of money is receipted. The state knows it is being collected, the US Embassy knows it is being collected, and it is packaged as part of the resources or revenue collected out of visa application processes. This automatically removes the corruption aspect from it. Obviously, there's another level of corruption that is happening with that, but then this removes the corruption component out of it. It removes the bribery component out of it and legitimizes a practice and collection of revenue that then, of course, causes the amount of money that would have otherwise been used as a bribe to be documented as revenue collected for the state or for the company, if you may. So for me, we must answer those critical questions of how we are going to get it done. And once we answer that question, how are we going to involve young people in thinking through the places, spaces, the lacuna in our society that allows for corruption? And how do we cover those areas? By one, improving the quality of governance, ensuring that there's participation of citizens in governance so that they give responses on how best it should work. And then positioning young people whose minds haven't been corrupted to participate in creating that system that promotes zero tolerance. I am extremely optimistic about the possibility of working with young people to get this to work. But it would definitely require a higher level punishment of corruption for those who are already, already have their fingers deep in the pie of corruption, to stop engaging in corruption. For as long as it's still affordable, for as long as they can still bribe lawyers and influence the courts, this may never stop.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Stella. I've taken note of a couple of things that I'll still ask on later, but let's hear from Shamil.
Yes, Farah. I mean, certainly, I agree with what Stella just said. I'm optimistic that young people actually are the solution to achieving zero corruption. And I say this because, in modern day, it's very easy for you to put in, for example, in financial controls, it's very possible for us to actually achieve maximum financial control to make sure that people don't take advantage of the system, to either conduct corrupt activities or to basically steal from various organizations, could be private, could be public. And then also on that, I think young people's, technological know-how, we can leverage that to make sure that we basically, attain zero corruption. And young people are quite versed on technologies, as Stella has mentioned. And I think that is our cue now to make sure that we now roll on the ball and start basically implementing and putting in this checks and balances through technology through technology to make sure that we fight corruption. Is my camera back on there now? Yes, thank you. Oh, hi. Yes, I had to make sure that you see me. Yes, and then also on that, I think social media, somehow we are underrating it as an advocacy tool, and really as as measures and policies are becoming even more stringent for people to take conversations to the streets in terms of protests and all that. Social media now becomes our modern protest tool, and that is where young people are. I love the fact that young people today, because they stand the most to lose in corrupt activities like grant corruption, whatever's happening, if our finances are being siphoned away from their courses, from development, and are taken away to personal missions and whatnot for the leadership. You often see young people taking these conversations to social media and basically breaking them down and calling out people, and I think then what we need to do as young people is to actually now start making sure that we have more of these conversations, more of this, a showcasing of what is being done in various countries and how young people are basically helping to fight, the corruption fight. And in that, I think young people more so, we need to start now somewhat incentivizing, good behavior, good governance, because I think what is actually missing in this whole in the whole conversation is we have so many examples of bad people. We have everywhere you look is like such and such is bad, is a corrupt man and all that. To a point now, it looks like a tagline, like they're not bothered at all. So it proves to us that basically, calling on the wrong people, calling on people who are doing corrupt activities, who are corrupt, it doesn't basically deter them from continuing what they're doing, because the justice system is not doing anything about it. But then what is missing is the good examples. Where are the good examples? Where are the people that we're seeing that are fighting corruption, that are principled, that are living by those principles and actually, have lost? Where are the people that have lost jobs? Where are the people that have basically lost opportunities because they couldn't stand for the wrong thing? Where are they? And I think that we need to now start incentivizing good governance. And that is an example that we need to set for young people. It starts first by celebrating talent for young people that are talented. We need to celebrate them so that they don't have to find other means to get into the system. And then again, on top of that, we need to now start incentivizing those people who have been at the lower levels, because they're the good ones. And I think there's so many levels to this conversation, particularly when it concerns public service. Because with public service and corruption, it's like, it's you really can't tell the difference between the two these days. It's like basically when you're saying, you know, public service, aka corruption, because people there are so unbothered about who's paying what bribery to get what project and all that. And therefore, now you find that the people that actually are somewhat our hopes to correcting this madness, they're the ones that are now being silenced. They're the ones that are not even being incentivized. They're the ones that are suffering, basically. You find someone has been in that position for 20 years and they can't move an inch because people know that this one is a good person. So because everyone is bad, they don't want the good one basically mixing. So I think what we need to do is just to have that structural overhaul and make sure that we start incentivizing good governance. And then I think also on that, there's an aspect in terms of, you know, why we're seeing a rise in corruption, even particularly seeing young people being actually accessories to corruption. Um, and it has to do with economic, the economic situation. How do we, amidst all this economic situation, how do we deter young people from taking part and being accessories in corrupt activities? How do we, when a young person is being offered $1,000, how do we ask that young person to not help that person to steal votes? How do we make sure that, they have bread on that table while doing the good thing? And I think that's where now the conversation gets really um, complex, because another person, from an individual perspective, they're looking at, man, my child is dying, they're hungry, and a politician is taking advantage of that because they're saying, you know what, I have $1,000 for you. You just need to make sure that this many votes, and to them it looks like small. And then looking at the benefit, they're thinking it's something big. How do we now work around this economic situations while still at the same time trying to incentivize and to ask young people to help in the fight against corruption? And I think that's where most people are when it comes to apathy and all that. People are like, you know what, at the end of the day, the fight looks much more bigger than an individual. How is it that I can be basically a goat for the slaughter when people are continuing eating, so I think that's a very interesting conversation that I would like to see, the balance between incentivizing young people being accessory to corruption and them now being incentivized to take a stance on, good governance, on good principles and a culture of integrity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very
Yeah.
much. Thank you, Stella. Thank you, Rasha. Thank you so much. You ladies are brilliant, and you've, proposed a lot of brilliant examples. And I hope that, our governance partners internationally who listen to this podcast are picking up on some of the things that you said. Especially around the social norms angle. What we do at Step Up Nigeria as well, I think 80% of our work is focused on young people. And so we're targeting primary schools, secondary schools, and like you said, the formative years of a child's life are where the child builds what values they think are most important for them. And so I think Africa really needs to take anti-corruption education more seriously. I mean, it should be something that is institutionalized in all the schools so that those who, like you said, are yet to, I mean, everybody experiences corruption. We see the poor electricity and the road network and all of that, the lack of social amenities, but they are yet to be corrupted in that sense. And so they're the ones I think Africa needs to focus on in molding, because there's a generation that we cannot change any longer. But like you've all said, there's also an apathy amongst young people. I think Stella also mentioned this, people have given up on the system. Things will never change. If you can't beat them, join them mentality. But I think we have to also remind young people that we all have a desire for the kind of country we want to live in. And if we want to build that country, that vision, that dream that we have, then we have to start today. We can't just give up and say, I mean, people all travel out of their countries, but not everyone can run away, which is what we always say in Nigeria. So we have to stay and build the nation that we live in. And I definitely agree with you guys that sanctions are so important, because if what we've taught young people over a couple is that young people can, older people can steal money from the government, they can embezzle large funds, and there's no consequences. no one ends up in prison, no one is really sanctioned, then we're telling the younger generation that stealing is okay, that fraud is okay, and that they can do these things and get away with them without any sanctions. And so definitely, like you've all said, I think it's back to the conversation around collective action. So we need the systems, we need sanctions, we need to change the social norms, we need improved governance. Like Shamil said, the economy also needs to be in a place where people are not forced to receive bribes because they're hungry and there's no food on their table. And we definitely need to provide more good role modeling for young people. We need leaders that we can point them to say this person has integrity. Like you said, this person has made this and this sacrifice in their career to ensure that their integrity is not lost. And I think those are people we need to exemplify for young people, even in schools, as these topics are being taught. So collective action really is what I'm hearing. We've cut this episode short so that you can enjoy listening to the part 2 on a separate episode. This was part 1 of our interview with African Youth Anti-Corruption Ambassadors. We hope you enjoyed it and that you would listen to part 2. Listen to part 2 next now on all podcasting platforms at Step Up Nigeria. Thank you.